Ha ha! I got the drink in before they went live. Talent. I don't like doing this. I don't like doing the countdown anymore. But
Yeah.
Justin Deal, Recovery in Action. How are you?
Good. Jay Staples, Sober Caddy. How you doing?
Living. I'm in Colorado, so
How are you?
I am. You don't really have to pretend that you're surprised. I mean, it does nothing for people. We're not trying to portray that we're just coming together. Like we've never really, like, hey, Justin, I've ran into you a few times. Like, it's really nice to take some time to talk. We don't
Yeah.
have, yeah, we don't have to do that. Like, you knew where I was. Like, but anyway, uh, so let's get right into it. You had a topic. Why don't you outline the topic and
Well,
then
yeah,
discuss?
it was something that came up, you know, over the weekend, and it was, families, are saying to the identified individual, you know, why are you doing this instead of what are you feeling? And I think that that's because my experience is that families are still reluctant to have conversations earlier on when their first instinct or their gut is telling them that something's wrong. They don't want to take a look at it themselves, or they don't want to believe it, and so they stuff it themselves. And then by the time something has risen to the surface, it just sort of blows up on them, and they don't they don't ask in a healthy way. And uh it puts the identified individual more on the defense instead of feeling like this is sort of a safe mutual ground.
Well, in a sense, if I did something to you, and I know that they're probably upset you, it takes a personal pep talk for me to approach you and ask you what's really going on because I know what you're going to talk about. You're going to talk about the thing that I did to you. So I think families, in a sense, don't want to hear some of the answers when what are you feeling. They may want to, that may tell them that's going to lead to some family secrets. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah. And you know switching this, cast members, right? If I did something to you and you don't bring it up, I'm certainly not going to bring it up. And so it really is on the whole family system to find their voices and communicate as things are going along, instead of thinking, oh, this person did something that upset me, and if I'm the person that was upset and I'm healthy, you know if the roles were reversed, I would make amends or apologize, and address it. And so we, as family members, sit around thinking, well, when's that coming, and when's it coming? And then time passes, and now family members start going, well, maybe I blew it, made a bigger deal out of it, or maybe too much time has passed, and so I have to wait until something else occurs again.
Well, here's the thing that and I'm sure you've heard it too, is, people that we may have intervened on or just talking with or, help or whatever it may be, there's a common theme. And I think it played out in my life too, that while in addiction, I've done certain things and my family's not even bringing it up anymore. They think of it as just normal activity. And the person that's struggling, it gets frustrated that they're not even talking about what they're doing anymore. It's almost as if the family's just kind of just turn the other cheek. And they're I came home drunk, like I made a mess, broke a glass, and woke up this morning thinking mom and dad were going to jump all over me. No one even brought it up. It was just really, and more families, I believe, are not even confronting behaviors anymore. They're just chalking it up to, oh, that's just Johnny.
right? And I think you sort of addressed it in your blog today of, the eggshells, uh, and that brought back my, even in early sobriety, I had an extended family member pass away suddenly, and I was probably a couple months sober at the time, and my mom almost didn't tell me, and she thankfully, ran it by my counselor because I was still, I had stepped down to a halfway house level of care, and you know, my mom was afraid to tell me because she thought I was still too fragile to take on that kind of news. And so, talk about eggshells. I mean, this is, a family member passing away at a, age where people don't normally do that. And I was, I was relieved that my counselor thought I could handle it. And it did give me an opportunity to show what progress, little progress, but still progress that I had made. But something as big as that, loved ones sometimes are like, well, I don't want them to, drink or use over this information. And so smaller things than that, they're definitely going to probably, if they don't have their own resources, therapist, Al-Anon sponsor, you know, coach, uh, they may just sort of go, well, you know, I'll address this at Thanksgiving when this relative doesn't show up uh, with the rest of the family.
Well, I think the walking on eggshells, most people think will go away once they go into a loved one goes into treatment or gets into, what early, quote unquote, early recovery and so forth. But, I think it just shifts. I think there's, like you were hitting on, I think there's, families need to completely understand the walking on eggshells pre treatment, i.e., recovery, and then post treatment and recovery. And so, yeah, like there's so many families that um, don't even know how to handle loved ones in early recovery. And what you were saying, they hold back and they create more resentments and lack of communication for fear of what they project on the addicted individual pre or post treatment, but they hold back on it because they play the whole tape out in their head according to their brain. This is how it's going to go, so I just won't tell them. I won't do this. I won't, whatever it may be. So most think the walking on eggshells will stop once they get into treatment or early in recovery. That is absolutely not the case because families are completely uncertain and somewhat afraid of success
Well,
within
and
their.
they may have fewer tools than the newly sober person if they didn't go to,
Oh
as our
well,
topic, was in the last week or two of, if they haven't attended a family program, they may not have any tools. Even if they did attend a family program, they may have tools but not know how to use them. And I've had, family members say things have not changed that much. Tommy or Susie are still not around the house very much. They're going out at 5:30 to a 6 p.m. meeting, but they're not coming home until 8:30 or 9 because they're getting there early and they're going to the meeting and then they're going to do fellowship. And the family member, all they see is, oh, my loved one is still out for 4 or 5 hours a night. And so the conversation that we need to have with them is, you need to have that conversation with your loved one, but also, there is a difference. The Tommy or Susie, when they were at home before they went to treatment or got sober, even if they were home, they weren't really present. They were just physically there. And walking the family through having the conversation of like, you know, I value and I appreciate that when you are here, uh, you're actually present and part of the conversation or the family. Um, but it bothers me, or I am jealous that you are still going out. Uh, and that, I mean, I think a lot of it comes back to the disease keeps families held hostage. And just because someone got sober doesn't mean that necessarily stops.
Which is lack of communication. I mean, I think in general in life, I think we can all get, better communicating, and what I call, authentic communication or whatever you want to call it. But this is more often than not what we basically have said for the first 10 minutes of this is the lack of communication for a number of different reasons. But what I would work with families on is, no matter where they are within this phase of recovery or not even into recovery, is the communication still needs to be the same. You can't, ignoring it or pretending like they're not acting addicted isn't doing anyone any favors. In fact, it drives the addicted one further away, because they're telling themselves their families have given up hope on them. Even they're not even bringing things up anymore. They used to at least yell at me or try to ground me or take away some things. Now they're not even saying anything. They're just ignoring like I'm even in the same room, and that's not healthy. And then when you flip into early recovery, families think that they need to start holding things back or not really say what's on their mind, and that in itself is going to create stories within everyone's head that, oh, they don't support me, they don't love me, whatever it may be. Reality, you got people working towards the same goal, just not communicating.
Yeah. So
So
hopefully we're communicating how important communicating is.
yeah. So, but it sounds very simple, but I think families are shocked to understand that. I came across, like, someone gave me an SOS 911 basically text yesterday and called it. It was a longtime family for, I don't know, 2-3 years ago or something like that. It was a daughter, daughter, and you know dad is back into recovery after a few slips or something. Has got 9 months or a year, something. But through the conversation, I was still realizing that this daughter was still trying to talk to dad before 6 p.m. Like, while she was growing up, she knew that post 6 p.m., dad was most likely going to be drunk. And still to this day, she still has that same rule that I can't come to dad post 6 p.m. It was like 6:30 or 7 or something. And I was like, well, what would it look like to have this conversation, to call up your dad and say exactly what you just said to me? And her response, without blinking, was, well, it's past 6. And I said, well, I thought, he's not drinking, right? No. Well, you can talk to him
Yeah.
past 6 p.m. But, and families, I don't think are aware. She was kind of, oh, like, I do this all the time. Like, that's just what I tell myself. I don't call my dad past 6 p.m. and even to this day. And I said, imagine what that says to your dad in general. Like, he probably is like, well, I know my daughter's never going to call me past 6 p.m. unless something, an urgent matter. So just talking and getting and analyzing what your beliefs were up to it. You need to change some what routines or something. Most families don't even know that's even ingrained in them. So
Yeah.
so many family members are, you know, creating unhealthy behaviors or boundaries, um, without even knowing it, because they're just been because the addiction taught them that. wherever it is. If you love an addict or alcoholic, your lives are going to be changed, and you start coming up with, I can't talk to dad past 6 p.m. I I can't leave my car keys, on the counter anymore. I can't leave my wallet, money, whatever. That It's shocking that that stays with them for a long, long time, even into recovery.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, I've at least used the example that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Um, but, what I've realized, or at least focused on more recently, is not only a marathon, but especially early on, it's a marathon through, a landmine field. And loved ones don't want to, step the wrong way. And so breaking them of their habits uh, is as important, if not more important, than, the newly sober or using person breaking their habits.
Or you have the family member pulling a car up and offering a ride for the marathon, preventing them from running the actual marathon themselves or going
Yeah.
through that line. You know, that the act of, when people say, when I hear families, I say, like, sometimes you have to watch them fail or go through certain things and not necessarily rescue them, whether they're in addiction or in early recovery. You can't prevent, someone from not getting wet when it's raining. You can't prevent, whatever it may be. So many families want to do that, and are doing it and preventing from any consequence from happening. I know I'm a byproduct of that. You know, my parents went out of their way to make sure no consequences, you know, ever touched me. And if there were consequences, lessen the consequences to the utmost, lowest degree. And you ask them, you hook them up to a lie detector test, they'll say, like, this is my job. I got to protect my son, no matter him being a knucklehead, but I'm still always going to protect my son. And they do, and people do it in early recovery too. Like, why, there's moms and dads right now thinking, when you're hearing a marathon, not a sprint, like, well, let's make it a sprint. I'll just get the car and I'll take them, or I'll show them a shortcut or whatever. I'll lay out the path or whatever and make. Sometimes, I'm grateful that I had many, many men in my life that needed, and forced me to walk through some things, and didn't necessarily help in certain situations when I knew that they could and wanted to, but I walked through a lot, i.e. 12 steps, i.e. feeling feelings, so many different things, getting connected to myself, cleaning my side of the street. I had to do all that myself. If someone were to do it for me, what am I really going to learn?
Yeah, they
Nothing.
let you experience it and realize that you were strong enough to experience it.
Or maybe find out that I'm not, but, and that, they at least let you walk through it. There's been, times that I struggle with certain things, and it's all right to come in and help and support and guide, but don't take away the obstacle altogether for them, because life's going to throw you another obstacle probably the very next day. So,
All
what?
right.
So, what do you think this all means? I know there's missions members at treatment facilities with several, let's call them my favorite, pending clients that have been pending for several months.
Sorry, can't make a phone call with your iPad.
Sorry about that. What?
Well, well, Now that was funny.
We'll have to edit that.
I hope there's a clip in there. Oh God. Uh, Too bad I was rumbling, stumbling, or else I should have been saying something funny or good. And then anyway, so admissions, we know it very well. I've lived it several years. We have the old pending case. What do we need to tell treatment centers, i.e., admissions departments, about the families refusing? The ones that just don't want to pull the trigger. This is a perfect opportunity to outsource into someone that has the time, willingness, and capability of working with a family, so we can we can get them to an agree, to a decision and to a goal.
Well, I mean, that's what we tell the admissions staffs, right? I mean, that is not what they are in place for. They are in place when a family or an individual is ready to get help. The admission staff is there to say, we have a bed available, or we will have a bed available on this date. Here is what our treatment program looks like and includes. If you have a family member that calls up an admissions person and says, I think that my loved one needs help, but they disagree, that is when the that is the point where the admissions staff should say, well, here are 3 numbers you can call to help walk you through where you're at, because whether the family realizes it or not, or the admissions staff realizes it or not, the family is also stuck. And we may not necessarily get the identified individual unstuck any better than an admission team, but we are very good at holding the mirror up to the family members or loved ones and showing them how they are stuck. And if they're stuck, they are part of the problem and not part of the solution either.
Well, I think, yeah, I think you can do a lot more if you go to outsourcing. Admissions department are overworked and overwhelmed, and if they're talking to a family and it's just like, and they want to ask about what kind of trees are on the campus, is it oak tree, is it pine, and so forth. They've got 3 other calls probably coming through to them at that given time that are waiting on verification of insurance and wanting to get them in. So these admissions people, not anyone's blame, are probably going to try their best and like, all right, well, give me a call when you're ready or something, and they just kind of toss them aside and hope that they call back. That is a perfect opportunity, like you were saying. Here's some numbers. Here are people that have the time, can have an outside perspective, and I would challenge you in the sense that we may not get people unstuck, families or individuals. I would challenge that. I think some people may not be willing to unstick themselves or something, but we provide so much. We can hold families accountable and hold that mirror up to them, like you were saying. I don't think admissions department members are willing to kind of give them hard truths, because let's be honest, what's the fear? Their fear is they're gonna say something that makes mom or dad hang up and never to call again.
Yeah.
We can say those hard truths. Sometimes families don't want to hear it. Sometimes families don't want to go with us because of it. But we can tell them the hard truth. And the truth is, the overriding truth is, if the family changes, success goes up.
Yep. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what the numbers are uh, the last decade or so, but the number of people that just go get well all by themselves is much lower than the number that people feel like they have some support and accountability from family or loved ones.
Well, Well, I had someone in the comments who was a couple, one of my blogs or maybe private messaged me. Thank you for it. I love insights and I love kind of brain teasers. But his point was simple. For every 10-year chip given out, there's probably hundreds of desired chips.
Yeah, well, it's because
That's
it
true. I mean, you can't deny that.
yeah, it's well, as you and I both know, it's a simple program that isn't easy. And, you know, I think that we, there is a 2 or 3% of the interventions that I've done over the years where the person said no the day of, and they go a day or two later, or, maybe 90 some days later. And that is because, you know, nothing changed in them, but the family at the intervention reestablished or established boundaries. And that person that goes 2 or 3 days later or 90 some days later is because the family didn't fall back into their old behavior either. They stuck to that accountability that they were getting and feeling. And the identified individual just, you know, realized that something was different. And so that's what moves them from desiring recovery and getting recovery.
Can I say something that probably no interventionist probably will ever say, but I'll say it because I
Because
actually
you're
think, I actually think, and sometimes hope that individuals don't say yes the day of the intervention, because what you were when you were talking, my brain lit up in the sense that I honestly believe, and some of the best success stories that I have, that I still get cards and emails and calls with, are the ones that kind of said no. Family held to those boundaries, like you're saying, so they're already put into action. They hold the boundaries. Individual calls back X number of days, weeks, months later, says, all right, I'll go. And that to me is when real change happens. I think, yes, we all want to get a yes the day of the intervention, but what normally happens, families think, all right, we're done. Oh man, that was a wild ride. And more often than not, I think, don't believe that boundaries need to be still in place. It doesn't just, boundaries aren't going to go away. Once if they call 2 weeks and want to leave, those boundaries, boom, the treatment center should have already have those boundaries in place. Like that, families, I think sometimes that no and how the family responds can mean everything. And
yeah,
sometimes an easy yes, the family's just like, well, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was. Like, oh, look at
don't
and
know if we even needed that guy.
yeah, and the individual's going because I don't even want to go. I don't have a problem. But mom and dad were going to kick me out, and what am I going to do? And the place looked nice, and I always wanted to go surfing, or I love dogs, or whatever it may be. And something when he called, a month later and said, "Jay, I'm ready. I'll go to treatment." You can already hear in their voice they've been beat up, and they've been thinking about it, and thinking about it. And there's no scientific research, and I'm not saying one way is the bet, one way or the other is better, but I would say just from the day of to the month later, you can kind of hear more willingness in that person that has been beat up for a month and the family's been holding boundaries instead of the yes at the day of. But every family,
Yeah.
No one wants to hear
Well,
that because everyone wants yes.
except what I mean, we don't know how many months or years the family has been afraid every time that the phone rang that it was the call that their loved one had died. And so if we don't get a yes the day of, that family is still in that level of fear and pain until hopefully we do get a call saying, you know what, you guys you've changed and fine, I'll go.
That's why
Yeah,
you're the better person. Like you know, I do. Yeah, there is that level of my mom slept with every phone she could think of, anything that communicate. If she thought I had a walkie-talkie, she would have a walkie-talkie underneath her pillow,
right.
and that would go away. You're right in saying that, and it's not as if I'm saying I wish that for families. You're exactly right, and that's probably why no one says it except for me. And I'm somewhat regretting saying it, but no one, you don't know what that no is going to lead to. You're exactly right. So I don't wish that on families. I just want to put a PSA out there, but go ahead.
No, yeah, I know that that's not what you meant, but and your sentiment is right on a lot of levels. And I, as we often do on this, show, share a lot of our own personal things. I was actually intervened on Sunday, August 19th of 2001. My sober date is Saturday, August 25th, because, I agreed to get an evaluation, which I thought would take 3 or 4 hours. And when I found out it took 5 days, I said, hell to the no. Um, and, but I gave my dad my word that I would come back the following Saturday. And that week, I'm lucky that I survived it. But it also, there had been a shift in how my family and the friends that participated in my intervention, how they communicated with me that week. And so those 6 days were probably the longest 6 days in all of my loved ones' lives. But they were very important days to me because I did see that change in them. But it also, I think, well, I know I felt like I had more of a part in starting the journey. And what we need to do as interventionists is that day of, let them know this is the beginning of the journey, and you have a say in it, but it starts today, hopefully.
My sobriety date has always been October 19th, and um, it's been a while now. I think it was like 10 or 11 years sober. I was talking at a conference, and um, I don't. Sometimes I black out when I'm up on stage, but I mentioned that, and it's true that I checked into treatment on October 19th. I was not drinking 5 days previous, um, contemplating whether or not to jump off the 11 or 12 story of the condo that my dad was an office living. And but I don't know the designers of this apartment though, but you could open the front door and a straight shot to the back to the patio, and over the gate was a straight shot. And I remember going all the way to the front door and running and having stopping of course, but having the thought of just continue to run for 5 days straight. And I finally called and said I need help. And I say all that, and this lady comes up to me after the talk and says, "Why isn't your sobriety date October 14th if you didn't drink for 5 days?" That never occurred to me, never has, still comes in my mind. I still say October 19th because that's when I believe I actually got into recovery. And those 5 days previous, God knows. I mean, I was not in the right state of mind. I may have done something, found something, or drank something that I'm not even my brain's not letting me tell you, but it would mean a lot more because I would beat my friend who's actually got sober October 17th, and that would mean the world to me if I could say October 14th. But I still to this day say October 19th because that's when I check in the treatment, and that's when I see my recovery started. So it's interesting that,
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, I used every one of those 6 days between the 19th and the 25th.
and well, you should like that. Just that's a little insight in where I was, where I didn't realize at the time, but I had come to that point where substances were no longer doing their job anyway. So
And
that,
no longer needed to help with your insanity.
some would say that's some would say that's rock bottom. Call it whatever you want, but it changed my life. But I will still be October 19th. But more and more I'm talking about, I would love to beat my friend. So maybe I'll change it this year because I moved to Nashville and no one really knows. So this is a perfect opportunity to.
Yeah. And nobody sees this, so it's safe.
Well, my mom knows, and that's the only person that watches this. So anyway, Justin, good job. Clock out. You're done for the day.
More lives to save.
See ya.